The massive space station called Nexus Prime stretched across the void like a glittering city among the stars. Inside its enormous meeting hall, representatives from 12 different alien civilizations gathered around a circular table that seemed to glow with its own inner light. The air buzzed with tension as creatures of all shapes and sizes discussed the greatest threat their galaxy had ever faced. Near the center of the room, tall crystalline beings from the ethereal assembly stood perfectly still, their bodies catching and reflecting the chamber's light in rainbow patterns. Their leader, a figure that looked like a living diamond, spoke in musical tones that the translation devices converted to standard galactic speech. Next to them, the representatives from the Hive Collective shifted restlessly, their bioengineered forms constantly adapting to the environment around them. These creatures had no fixed shape, instead flowing like liquid metal while maintaining roughly humanoid appearances. The Zephyrian delegation commanded attention from their position at the table's head. Their sleek, predatory forms were encased in ceremonial armor that seemed to absorb light, creating an aura of menace around each warrior. Admiral Kethfer, their leader, adjusted his battle harness with practiced ease, the motion causing his armor to ripple like water. His species had conquered half their home sector through superior technology and ruthless efficiency. Other species filled the remaining spaces around the table. The insectoid Montari clicked their mandibles in complex patterns, communicating through sounds that made most other races uncomfortable. The gaseous nebulans floated in containment suits, their forms shifting like clouds within transparent barriers. Each delegation represented thousands of years of technological advancement and military might. Then the human ship arrived. Captain Lee Min-ho pressed his face against the viewport of his vessel, watching as the massive docking bay doors of Nexus Prime slowly opened to receive them. The Defiant limped forward like a wounded animal, its engines sputtering and backfiring with each thrust. Black smoke trailed from several vents along the hull, and the ship's approach was marked by a series of minor course corrections that made it appear as though the pilot could barely control the vessel. The ship itself was a sight to behold, though not in any impressive way. Its hull was a patchwork of different metals welded together with visible seams that ran like scars across the surface. Some sections were bright silver, others a dull gray, and still others showed the brown stain of rust. Weapon emplacements jutted from the hull at odd angles, looking like they had been added as afterthoughts rather than integral parts of the design. Several of these weapons appeared to be held in place by nothing more than metal brackets and hope. Min-ho turned to his crew, all of whom were working hard to maintain their carefully practiced appearances of barely controlled chaos. Officer Park Soyeon sat at her station, fingers dancing across a control panel that sparked occasionally, sending small showers of sparks across her workspace. She wore a worried expression that suggested she was never quite sure if her equipment would work when she needed it most. "Captain," she said, her voice carrying just the right note of uncertainty, "we're receiving transmission from the station. They want to know if we need assistance with our docking procedures." Min-ho scratched his head, messing up his hair in a way that made him look like he had just rolled out of bed. "Tell them we've got it under control. We've only crashed into 3 things this week." Across the bridge, engineer Kim Tae-hein was performing his own act of incompetence. He knelt beside an open wall panel, tools scattered around him as he poked at wires with the concentrated frown of someone who was not entirely sure what he was doing. Occasionally, he would touch 2 wires together, causing a small flash and a curse word in Korean. The panel would then emit a series of beeps that sounded distinctly unhappy. "It's her," Tae-han called out. "I think I've got the artificial gravity stabilized, but the recycling system is making that noise again." As if summoned by his words, a low, grinding sound echoed through the ship, followed by what sounded like something heavy falling down a very long shaft. The lights flickered twice, then resumed their normal brightness. "That's probably fine," Min-ho said, with the tone of someone who had long ago given up on having things work properly. "Just keep it running until we can get to a proper repair facility." The Defiant approached the docking bay with all the grace of a drunk person trying to thread a needle. The ship's pilot, Lieutenant Commander Choi Ji-woo, appeared to be fighting with the controls, her movements jerky and overcorrected. The vessel swayed from side to side, occasionally drifting too close to the bay walls before lurching back toward the center. Inside the station's observation deck, the assembled alien representatives watched the human ship's approach, with expressions ranging from amusement to disgust. Admiral Kethfer of the Zephyrian fleet leaned forward, his armored form creating small reflections in the transparent aluminum viewing wall. "Is that supposed to be a warship?" he asked, his voice carrying the kind of condescension usually reserved for small children attempting adult tasks. "It looks like a construction accident that someone forgot to clean up." The collective's bioship captain, a creature whose form shifted constantly between different configurations, produced a sound that the translation systems rendered as laughter. The humans sent a garbage scow to fight the void swarm. How delightfully primitive. Perhaps they planned to ram the enemy vessels and hope for the best. A Mantari delegate clicked its mandibles in what might have been agreement. "Our intelligence reports suggest human technology is several centuries behind galactic standards. This vessel appears to confirm those assessments." The Ethereal Assembly's representative pulsed with colors that indicated polite skepticism. "Perhaps their contribution will be in other areas. Not every species excels at naval warfare." Meanwhile, aboard the Defiant, the crew continued their performance with the dedication of professional actors. Navigation Officer Han Soo-jin, Kay, announced course corrections in a voice that suggested she was reading from a manual she did not quite understand. Weapons Officer Yang Hai-jin periodically reported that various systems were offline, online, or in some undefined state between the two. The ship finally reached the docking bay, but not without incident. The Defiant scraped against the bay's entrance, producing a sound like fingernails on metal that made everyone within hearing distance wince. The ship overcorrected, bounced off the opposite wall, and finally settled into the docking cradle. With a series of metallic crashes that suggested several important components had just fallen off, Minho stood up, straightening his rumpled uniform with the air of someone who had become accustomed to such minor disasters. "Well, that could have gone worse. Remember, everyone, we're here to help however we can. Earth is counting on us to make a good impression." The irony of that statement was not lost on any of the crew members, all of whom had to suppress smiles. As they prepared to disembark, they had spent months preparing for this moment, rehearsing every aspect of their performance. The Defiant might look like a disaster waiting to happen, but appearances could be deceiving. As the docking procedures completed and the airlock cycled, Minho took one last look around his bridge. Everything was proceeding exactly according to plan. The other species had already dismissed humanity as irrelevant, which was precisely what Earth's military strategists had hoped would happen. The captain activated the ship's internal communication system. "All hands. This is the captain. We are about to begin the most important mission in human history. Remember your training, trust your equipment, and let's show the galaxy what happens when you underestimate the human species." The Defiant had arrived at Nexus Prime, and the real game was about to begin. 3 days had passed since the human ship docked at Nexus Prime, and the Defiant had become the favorite topic of conversation in every corridor, cantina, and meeting room throughout the massive space station. Alien crew members would point and whisper as Captain Lee Minho and his officers walked by, their expressions ranging from pity to outright mockery. The morning briefing in the main conference chamber was particularly brutal. Captain Minho sat at the far end of the curved table, looking uncomfortable in his wrinkled uniform as he fumbled with a datapad that seemed to be giving him trouble. The device beeped repeatedly, and he kept turning it different ways as if hoping to find the correct orientation. Admiral Kethfer of the Zephyrian fleet leaned back in his chair, his armored form radiating confidence. "The human captain appears to be having technical difficulties again," he observed loudly enough for everyone to hear. "Perhaps someone should explain to him which end of the device faces up." The Ethereal Assembly's representative, a being of pure crystal that refracted light in beautiful patterns, pulsed with colors that indicated polite concern. Through its translation matrix, it spoke in musical tones that somehow conveyed condescension despite their beauty. "Captain Lee, perhaps? Your vessel would be better suited for supply runs. We understand that not every species has the same aptitude for combat operations." Minho looked up from his malfunctioning data pad, blinking in apparent confusion. He scratched his head, further messing up his already disheveled hair. Well, we'd like to help however we can. Earth sent us because we're supposed to be pretty. Good at fixing things that are broken. Maybe we could help with repairs or something. The collective's bioship captain, whose form shifted constantly like liquid metal, produced a sound that might have been laughter. Your ship appears to be in need of significant repairs itself. We observed your docking procedure 3 days ago. It was educational. Around the table, other delegates exchanged glances that clearly indicated they viewed the humans as well-meaning, but hopeless. The Montari delegate clicked its mandibles in what sounded like agreement, while the Nebulan representative floated in its containment suit, its gaseous form swirling with what might have been amusement. Meanwhile, 2 decks below, in the Defiance engineering section, a very different scene was playing out. Chief Engineer Kim Tae-hein moved through the ship's corridors with the fluid grace of someone who knew every bolt and circuit by heart. His earlier bumbling act was nowhere to be seen as he directed his team with quiet efficiency. Status report. On the gravitic cannon array, he whispered to his second-in-command, Engineer Park Min-jin, who was monitoring a bank of displays that showed readings far beyond anything the Allied forces possessed. All systems optimal, sir. Quantum field generators are running at 98% efficiency. We could punch through a Zephyrian dreadnought's shields without breaking a sweat. Tae-hai nodded, then gestured toward another console where Engineer Yoon Hyren was analyzing data streams from dozens of microscopic reconnaissance drones. The stealth drones have mapped every ship in the Allied fleet, she reported, her voice barely above a whisper. We have complete technical specifications for their weapons, shields, and propulsion systems. The Zephyrian plasma cannons are impressive. They have a 3-second recharge cycle that any decent targeting system could exploit. The ship's AI, which the aliens believed to be nothing more than a simple navigation computer, was actually coordinating a network of these stealth drones. Each drone was smaller than a grain of sand and completely invisible to the detection systems used. By the other species, they had been deployed the moment the Defiant arrived at Nexus Prime, spreading throughout the station and the surrounding fleet like an electronic plague. Lieutenant Commander Choi Ji-woo entered the engineering section. Her earlier clumsy pilot act replaced by the confident stride of someone who could thread a needle while flying through an asteroid field. She approached Tae-hain's workstation and activated a holographic display that showed the technical specifications of every ship in the Allied fleet. The collective's bioships are particularly interesting, she said, pointing to a 3-dimensional model that rotated slowly in the air. Their adaptive armor can adjust to counter new weapon types, but it takes 30 seconds to fully respond. It's more than enough time for a coordinated strike if you know what you're doing. Tae-hein studied the display, his mind already calculating attack patterns and vulnerabilities. What about their propulsion systems? Biological thrust chambers that can be overloaded if you hit them with the right frequency of gravitic pulses. They'd be sitting ducks for about 2 minutes while their systems regenerated. The intelligence gathering was not limited to their supposed allies. The stealth drones had been tracking Void Swarm movements for weeks, building a comprehensive database of their tactics, technology, and weaknesses. While the Galactic Council spent hours debating formation strategies and defensive positions, the humans were quietly learning everything they needed to know about their enemy. Navigation. Officer Han Soo-jin approached the group, her expression serious despite the smile she had worn during the morning briefing. Captain, we're receiving another diplomatic communication from the Ethereal Assembly. They're suggesting that we might want to stay with the civilian transports during the upcoming battle. Minho, who had joined the group after leaving the conference room, allowed himself a small smile. Tell them we appreciate their concern for our safety, but we'll do our best to stay out of the way. The irony of the situation was not lost on any of the crew members. The other species were so convinced of human inferiority that they were essentially asking Earth's most advanced warship to hide. Behind refugee vessels while they fought a battle, they had no hope of winning. Weapons Officer Young Hae-jin looked up from her analysis of the Void Swarm's energy signatures. Sir, based on our drone reconnaissance, the enemy's dark energy weapons operate on a frequency that would be completely ineffective against our quantum-hardened armor. They're designed to counter conventional shield technology, not the multi-layered defense systems we're carrying. What about their adaptive capabilities? Minho asked. Limited to known weapon types. They've never encountered gravitic manipulation. On the scale we can produce. Their adaptation protocols don't even have parameters for quantum phase torpedoes. The captain nodded, satisfied with the intelligence his team had gathered. The Void Swarm might be terror incarnate to the rest of the galaxy, but to humans who had spent decades preparing for this exact scenario, they were simply another engineering problem to be solved. Intelligence Officer Lee Sung-min entered the area carrying a data crystal that glowed with stored information. Captain, we've completed our analysis of the enemy fleet composition. They're using a standard hexagonal formation with their command vessel in the center, surrounded by screening units. It's very predictable once you understand their tactical doctrine. Accepted the crystal and plugged it into the central analysis computer. The holographic display immediately updated to show the projected battle space, complete with enemy positions and movement patterns. How long until the engagement? He asked. 18 hours, sir. Yeah. The Void Swarm will drop out of hyperspace at the edge of the Kepler system, exactly where our projections indicated they would. The captain looked around at his crew, all of whom had spent months preparing for this moment. The galaxy's most advanced civilizations were about to face their greatest challenge, and they had no idea that salvation would come from the species they had dismissed as primitive. Excellent work, everyone. Continue monitoring the situation and prepare for combat operations. It's almost time to show the galaxy what happens when you underestimate humanity. The fabric of space itself seemed to tear open as the Void Swarm dropped out of hyperspace at the edge of the Kepler system. What emerged was not just a fleet, but a nightmare-given form. Hundreds of vessels materialized in perfect formation, each one shaped like a twisted dagger carved from absolute darkness. The ships seemed to drink in the light from nearby stars, creating patches of emptiness that hurt to look at directly. Captain Lee Minho stood on the bridge of the Defiant, watching the enemy fleet arrange itself with the precision of a military parade. Each vessel took its designated position without hesitation, forming a complex pattern that suggested these creatures had done this dance of death many times before. The largest ships formed the center of the formation, their hulls bristling with weapons that pulsed with malevolent energy. Enemy fleet composition matches our intelligence reports. Navigation Officer Han Soo-jin reported, her voice steady despite the magnitude of what they were facing. 347 vessels arranged in a modified hexagonal pattern. With command ships in the center, Allied fleets responded immediately to the threat. Admiral Cuthbert's Zephyrian dreadnoughts moved forward in a wedge formation, their sleek hulls gleaming like polished silver against the starfield. These ships had been the terror of their home sector for centuries, each one carrying enough firepower to level a small moon. Their plasma cannons began charging, creating a low hum that could be felt through the hull of every nearby vessel. Behind the Zephyrians, the collective's bioships prepared for battle in their own unique way. These living vessels writhed and twisted, their organic hulls flowing like liquid as they adapted to combat conditions. Armor plates thickened, weapon pods extended, and sensor arrays spread wide to gather information about their enemies. The ships looked less like constructed vessels and more like enormous sea creatures preparing to hunt. The ethereal assembly's crystalline ships took position on the flanks, their transparent hulls refracting starlight into rainbow patterns. These vessels relied on energy weapons that could slice through conventional armor like paper, and their defensive systems created shimmering barriers that had never been penetrated by enemy fire. Their beautiful weapons officer Yang Haijin observed from her position at the tactical station. She watched as the alien formations moved with practiced precision, each species contributing their unique strengths to the overall battle plan, and they're about to get torn apart. The first exchange of fire began as the Zephyrian dreadnoughts came within range of the enemy fleet. Their plasma cannons opened fire in unison, creating brilliant streaks of superheated gas that crossed the void like burning spears. The weapons found their targets, striking the lead Void Swarm vessels with enough energy to vaporize a small asteroid. The enemy ships absorbed the impact without showing any visible damage. Where the plasma beams struck, The dark holes simply seemed to drink in the energy, leaving no mark or scar. Then the void swarm returned fire. Dark energy beams lanced out from the enemy vessels, each one a concentrated stream of nothingness that seemed to cut through space itself. These weapons struck the Zephyrian shields with devastating effect, punching through defensive barriers that had been considered impenetrable. The first dreadnought to take a direct hit simply ceased to exist, its hull dissolving into component atoms in seconds. "By the stars!" Admiral Kethfer's voice crackled through the communication system, shock evident even through the translation matrix. "Their weapons are cutting through our shields like they're not even there." The collective's bioships fared no better. Their adaptive armor, which had evolved to counter every known weapon type, proved useless against the Void Swarm's technology. The living hulls tried desperately to adjust their molecular structure, but the dark energy beams simply ignored their defenses. Ship after ship fell silent as their crews were consumed by weapons that turned matter itself into energy. The ethereal Assembly's crystalline vessels shattered like glass when struck by the enemy fire. Their beautiful, transparent hulls, which had seemed so elegant in the starlight, proved to be fatally brittle when faced with technology they had never encountered before. The rainbow patterns that had marked their passage faded into dull gray. Debris that tumbled through space. Captain Lee, Admiral Kethfer's voice, came through the communication system again, this time carrying a note of desperation that the proud Zephyrian had never shown before. "I'll recommend you withdraw to the civilian fleet immediately. We're taking heavier casualties than anticipated. This is not a battle your people should be part of." Minho exchanged glances with his crew members, all of whom had dropped their earlier acts of incompetence. They had watched this exact scenario play out in computer simulations countless times over the past 40 years. The Allied forces were brave and their technology was impressive by galactic standards. But they were fighting with weapons and tactics that had become obsolete the moment humanity first encountered the Void Swarm decades ago. Lieutenant Commander Choi Gi-woo looked up from her sensor readings, her expression grim. "Sir, we're losing Allied vessels at a rate of 1 every 30 seconds. At this pace, the entire fleet will be destroyed within 2 hours." The tactical display showed the battle in stark detail. Red icons representing Allied ships were winking out of existence with terrifying regularity, while the Void Swarm's formation remained virtually unchanged. The enemy had not even committed their reserve forces yet, suggesting they viewed this as little more than a training exercise. "The Monterey light cruisers are attempting a flanking maneuver," Tactical Officer Park So-young reported. "They're trying to hit the enemy from 3 different angles simultaneously." Minho watched as the insectoid vessels spread out in a complex pattern, their movements coordinated with the precision that only a hive mind could achieve. It was a brilliant tactical move that should have divided the enemy's attention and created opportunities for the heavier ships to strike. The Void Swarm's response was swift and merciless. Dark energy beams reached out like the fingers of death, touching each Montari vessel in turn. The light cruisers, which had been moving at maximum speed just moments before, suddenly stopped as if they had hit an invisible wall. Then they began to dissolve, their hulls breaking down at the molecular level until nothing remained but expanding clouds of dust.
"All stations,"
Minho announced quietly, his voice carrying across the bridge with the authority of someone who had been preparing for this moment his entire career. "Prepare for combat operations. Remove the camouflage. It's time to show them what Earth really sent." The transformation began with a sound like thunder rolling across the hull. Hidden panels slid open along the Defiant's exterior, revealing systems that had been carefully concealed beneath layers of fake armor plating. The ship's crude, patchwork appearance began to change as sections of the hull rotated and reconfigured themselves. "Chief," Engineer Kim Tae-hein's voice came through. The internal communication system calm and professional. Hull reconfiguration in progress. Weapon systems coming online. Stealth field generators warming up. The Allied fleets, still fighting their desperate battle against the Void Swarm, had no idea that salvation was about to arrive from the most unexpected source. The human ship they had dismissed as a joke was about to reveal its true nature, and the galaxy would never be the same. The transformation of the Defiant began with a deep rumble that seemed to come from the very bones of the ship. Whole plates that had appeared crudely welded together suddenly revealed their true purpose as they retracted with mechanical precision. Each section folded away like the petals of some enormous metallic flower, exposing the deadly beauty that had been hidden beneath the disguise. What emerged was a vessel that looked like it had been crafted by angels of war. The ship's true hull was a masterpiece of engineering, its surface flowing in smooth curves that spoke of perfect aerodynamics and optimal armor distribution. Where ugly welding seams had been visible before, sleek weapon ports now opened like the eyes of a predator awakening from sleep. The Defiant's new form was longer and more graceful than its disguised appearance had suggested. The hull seemed to absorb light rather than reflect it, giving the ship an almost ethereal quality as it moved through space. Along its length, dozens of weapon emplacements emerged from hidden compartments, each one tracking potential targets with the fluid motion of a living creature. Engineer Kim Tae-han stood at his control station, monitoring the transformation, with the calm efficiency of someone who had practiced this procedure 1,000 times. His earlier bumbling act was completely gone, replaced by the focused intensity of a master craftsman overseeing his greatest creation. "Hull reconfiguration complete," he reported, his voice steady and professional. "All weapon systems are now online. Stealth field generators are active and functioning at full capacity. Gravitic cannon arrays are charged and ready for combat operations." The ship's AI, which had spent days pretending to be nothing more than a simple navigation computer, suddenly revealed its true nature. The voice that emerged from the speakers was smooth, intelligent, and utterly confident. "Captain, I have acquired target locks on 47 enemy vessels. Quantum torpedoes are loaded and ready for deployment. Point defense systems are tracking 3,215 incoming projectiles." Captain Minho stood from his command chair, and the transformation in his demeanor was as dramatic as the change in his ship. The confused, bumbling officer who had stumbled through briefings was gone, replaced by a military professional whose every movement spoke of years of training and combat experience. His uniform, which had seemed wrinkled and poorly fitted before, now revealed itself to be a sophisticated piece of military technology that monitored his vital signs, provided tactical information directly to his enhanced vision. "Weapons. Free," he commanded, his voice carrying the authority of someone who had been born to lead others into battle. "Show them what happens when you threaten Earth and her colonies." The Defiant struck with the speed and precision of a lightning bolt. The gravitic cannons, which had been completely invisible moments before, spoke with voices of controlled destruction. These weapons did not fire projectiles or energy beams, but instead manipulated gravitational fields to tear enemy vessels apart at the molecular level. The first salvo reached its targets in less than a second, and 3 Void Swarm vessels simply ceased to exist as their atomic bonds were disrupted by forces they could not comprehend. Quantum torpedoes followed the initial barrage, phasing through space-time itself to bypass enemy shields completely. These weapons existed in multiple dimensions simultaneously, making them impossible to intercept or deflect. They materialized inside enemy hulls and detonated with the fury of miniature stars, turning the most heavily armored vessels into expanding clouds of superheated plasma. The point defense systems created a barrier of destruction around the Defiant that seemed almost impossible to penetrate. Thousands of micromissiles and energy bursts reached out to intercept incoming fire, each one guided by targeting computers that could track individual atoms across interstellar distances. The ship moved through the enemy barrage like a dancer, performing a deadly ballet. It's untouchable and unstoppable. Admiral Kethfer's voice crackled through the communication system, filled with shock and disbelief. "Impossible. How are they doing that? Those weapons don't exist in any database. That ship was a piece of junk 3 minutes ago." The ethereal assembly's representative, its crystalline form pulsing with colors that indicated complete bewilderment, transmitted on the general frequency. "The human vessel has transformed into something we do not recognize. Its weapons are operating on principles that our science cannot explain. Tactical Officer Park So-young's fingers moved across her control console with the speed and precision of a master musician playing a complex symphony. Her earlier act of struggling with malfunctioning equipment was forgotten as she coordinated the ship's offensive systems with deadly efficiency. "Sir, enemy formation is breaking up," she reported, her voice calm despite the chaos surrounding them. "They're trying to adapt to our weapons, but the quantum matrix is cycling through defensive frequencies faster than their systems can compensate. We're hitting them with weapons that change their fundamental properties every few seconds." Void Swarm, which had seemed unstoppable just moments before, found itself facing an opponent that had studied their every move for decades. Each human weapon had been specifically designed to counter the enemy's technology. Every maneuver exploited weaknesses that the reconnaissance drones had identified. During years of careful observation, Lieutenant Commander Choi Ji-woo piloted the Defiant through the battle space with skills that bordered on the supernatural. Her movements were so precise that she seemed to know where enemy fire would be directed before the aliens themselves made the decision to shoot. The ship danced between dark energy beams that would have vaporized any other vessel, always staying one step ahead of destruction. Their adaptive armor is trying to counter our gravitic manipulation, Weapons Officer Yang Haijin observed, watching as enemy vessels attempted to modify their defensive systems. But they're working from incomplete data. They don't understand that our weapons exist in 11 dimensions simultaneously. The battle began to turn as more Void Swarm vessels fell to the human assault. Ships that had seemed invincible minutes before were now exploding and brilliant. Flashes of light as their exotic matter cores were destabilized by weapons they could not defend against. The enemy's perfect formation began to dissolve as individual vessels attempted to escape the slaughter. Intelligence Officer Lee Seung-min looked up from his sensor display, his expression grim. "Captain, we're receiving surrender signals from 3 enemy vessels. They're attempting to disengage from the battle." Minho's expression hardened, his eyes reflecting the memory of colonies burned and populations enslaved. "No prisoners. Don't take any when they attack our worlds, and neither do we. Continue the attack until every last one of them is destroyed." The Defiant pressed its advantage, moving through the enemy formation like a shark among schools of fish. Each shot found its mark. Each maneuver brought the ship closer to total victory. The Void Swarm, which had terrorized the galaxy for generations, was finally meeting an opponent that understood war as well as they did. The transformation was complete. The rusty, patched-together vessel that had been the subject of jokes throughout, Nexus Prime had revealed itself as humanity's ultimate weapon, and the galaxy would never underestimate Earth again. The battlefield fell silent for a moment as the smaller Void Swarm vessels retreated to the edges of the engagement zone. Then, like a mountain rising from the depths of space, the enemy flagship emerged from the rear of their formation. Massive vessel dwarfed everything else in the star system, its dark hull stretching 4 kilometers in every direction. Where the other Void Swarm ships had been the size of skyscrapers, this monster was the size of a city. The flagship's hull was covered in weapons that pulsed with malevolent energy. Massive, dark energy cannons jutted from its sides like the spines of some prehistoric beast, each one capable of destroying a moon with a single shot. Smaller weapon clusters dotted its surface like scales, creating overlapping fields of fire that would make approaching the vessel nearly impossible for any conventional fleet. Intelligence. Officer Lee Seung-min stared at his sensor readings, his face pale despite his years of military training. "That's their command vessel," he reported, his voice steady despite the magnitude of what they were facing. "Our reconnaissance drones identified it 3 weeks ago during their approach to this system. It's the same ship that destroyed the Centauri colonies 40 years ago." Captain Minho felt a cold satisfaction settle in his chest, like ice water in his veins. The memories of those lost colonies had driven humanity's military development for 4 decades. Millions of humans had died in that attack, their worlds turned to ash by the creature that now faced them across the void. "Then it's time for some payback," he said quietly. "All power to forward weapons, prepare for single combat." The Defiant began to move toward the enemy flagship with the deliberate pace of a predator stalking its prey. The ship's engines hummed. With barely contained energy, as Chief Engineer Kim Tae-hyun redirected power from non-essential systems to the weapon arrays. The vessel's hull began to glow with the heat of the massive energies flowing through its systems. The flagship responded to the challenge by turning its bulk toward the approaching human vessel. Despite its enormous size, the enemy ship moved. With surprising grace, its dark hull cutting through space like a blade through silk. The weapon clusters along its surface began to track the Defiant's approach, each one preparing to deliver destruction on a scale that few beings in the galaxy had ever witnessed. The two vessels began their deadly dance across the star system, each one seeking the perfect angle of attack while avoiding the other's weapons. The flagship's dark energy beams carved through space where the Defiant had been moments before, leaving trails of distorted space-time that would take hours to heal. The human ship responded with precisely targeted shots from its gravitic cannons, each one aimed at specific weak points that the reconnaissance drones had identified during weeks of observation. Lieutenant Commander Choi Gi-woo piloted the Defiant, skills that bordered on the impossible. She anticipated the enemy's movements with an intuition that came from years of studying their tactics. Weaving between attacks that would have vaporized any other vessel, the ship moved like a dancer performing a deadly ballet, always staying one step ahead of destruction. Their command center is heavily shielded, Weapons Officer Yang Haizhen reported, her targeting system struggling to penetrate the enemy's defenses. But I'm detecting a weak point in their primary power coupling. If we can hit it with a quantum torpedo, we might be able to overload their entire weapons grid. The battle between the two ships raged for what felt like hours, but was actually only minutes. Each vessel pushed its technology to the absolute limit, seeking any advantage that might tip the balance of the engagement. The Defiant's point defense systems worked overtime to intercept the smaller projectiles that the flagship launched like a swarm of angry insects. Suddenly, a new voice crackled through the communication system. The Ethereal Assembly's representative, its crystalline form pulsing with colors that indicated complete amazement, transmitted on the general frequency. Captain, our sensors are detecting additional human vessels approaching from multiple vectors. How is this possible? Captain Minho allowed himself a grim smile as he watched the tactical display update with new contacts. That's correct, he replied, his voice carrying the satisfaction of a plan that had been decades in the making. Did you think Earth would send just one ship to fight a war? Throughout the star system, additional human vessels began to decloak, like ghosts materializing from the void. Each ship was different from the others, purpose-built to counter specific void swarm tactics that had been observed and analyzed over the years. Some were sleek interceptors designed to hunt down the enemy scout vessels, while others were massive siege ships capable of cracking open the heaviest fortifications. The newly arrived human fleet moved with the coordination of a pack of wolves, each vessel taking its designated position in a formation that had been practiced countless times in simulations. The Void Swarm found itself surrounded by opponents that seemed to appear from nowhere, their perfect formation dissolving into chaos as they tried to respond to threats from every direction. The enemy flagship, realizing that its fleet was being systematically destroyed, made one final desperate charge toward the Defiant. The massive vessel accelerated with surprising speed, its weapons firing continuously in an attempt to overwhelm the human ship's defenses. Dark energy beams lanced out in every direction, turning the space around the flagship into a storm of destructive force. But the Defiant had been designed for exactly this moment. The ship's quantum-hardened armor absorbed the enemy's attacks, while its own weapons found their marks with surgical precision. Weapons Officer Yang Haizhen's targeting system finally achieved a perfect lock on the enemy's command center, crosshairs settling on the exact spot where the flagship's brain was located. Fire, Captain Minho ordered, his voice carrying the weight of 40 years of preparation. The quantum torpedo streaked across the void, its warhead existing in multiple dimensions simultaneously. The enemy's shields, which had proven impenetrable to every other weapon in the galaxy, offered no resistance to a projectile that could phase through the barriers between realities. The torpedo struck the flagship's command center and detonated. With the fury of a miniature star, the massive enemy vessel simply ceased to exist. One moment it was there, a mountain of dark metal bristling with weapons, and the next it was gone, leaving only an expanding cloud of elementary particles that glowed briefly before dispersing into the cosmic background radiation. The remaining void swarm vessels, their command structure destroyed and their formations in ruins, began to flee toward the edge of the star system. Some managed to escape into hyperspace, while others were hunted down by the human fleet before they could reach safety. Within minutes, the most feared armada in galactic history had been reduced to scattered debris and fleeing survivors. The representatives of the galactic community sat in stunned silence as they watched the aftermath of the battle. The humans they had dismissed as primitive had just demonstrated technology that made their own vessels look like toys. The species they had treated as a joke had single-handedly destroyed an enemy that had terrorized the galaxy for generations. Admiral Kethfer's voice came through the communication system, filled with a respect that had been completely absent just hours before. Captain Lee, Earth's contribution to this alliance has been significantly understated. We owe you an apology and much more. Minho looked out at the debris field that had once been the most feared fleet in the galaxy, his expression calm despite the magnitude of what they had just accomplished. We prefer to let our actions speak for themselves, Admiral. The Void Swarm made the mistake of attacking Earth colonies 40 years ago. We've been preparing for their return ever since.